All right, so with this, I just want to lay out a few thoughts or, basically, there have been a number of patterns or things that I've seen happen with the project idea, and I want to kind of lay that out to you. Now, in another video, and in an email as well, and with some notes, I'll try to explain the difference between kind of why I have the roof foundation and then another sponsor. And the general answer to that is just I want us to all follow the same guidelines so that we have the same number of pages. Grants are pretty much the same, but even sometimes for the Department of Ed, like as an example, they won't require a budget. They'll negotiate the budget post-award if somebody's awarded. So just, they vary sometimes like that. And I want to make sure we're all on the same page. I want to make sure you learn all the sections of a grant. So what I basically ask you to do is follow the guidelines of the Roof Foundation, but also have another, a specific grant opportunity like the Ball Brothers Foundation, Community Foundation, some other foundation, or somewhere you could actually submit the proposal to, because the values of that organization should guide you in writing your in writing your proposal. You should try to have those things align. So with the project idea, let me start with some pitfalls or problems that I've seen students run into. One is taking on too much or sort of indulging in something that's a bit overly complex. And this could be things like, sometimes I have students who every semester who want to write to a federal program. I ask that you not do that. Examples would be like the Office of Violence Against Women, the Department of Justice, the Department of Agriculture. These are all great programs and they're great, they're wonderful grant programs. But see, the thing is that like even those organizations, they tend to be very specific. OVW or the Office of Violence Against Women, they have specific programs. And so it's not enough to say you're going to write to the Office of Violence Against Women. You have to know specifically which program, and those grants tend to be hundreds of pages, very, very complex. And I would just recommend starting with something small. The other thing in terms of overly large is just taking on or having an idea that's just like thinking about like the opioid crisis or human trafficking or, a grant idea or a project idea needs to be, it's a project that requires funding. So it's something that you want to be able to accomplish within a year with a given amount of money. The amount that I would suggest for this class is somewhere in the $5,000 to $30,000 range. I think that's manageable for a first-time grant writer for a semester course. So with something like, opioids or human trafficking, those are just huge problems, very complex. There are obviously multiple agencies within the state and within different parts of the country that work on those issues or are committed to those issues. So you really have to narrow it down. And when we get to the needs section, what I'll try to really push you to do is find a target area and a target population. So to specifically think about a geographic area. So you have to know that something's a problem or issue in that area for that population. Another big pitfall that I see is I think some people think grants, they think money, and they think they want to buy something. And so every semester I seem to get a number of students who their project idea basically is like buy computers, buy video equipment, purchase things. And I just never think that goes well. I will push back and say, well, you need to develop goals, objectives. There needs to be something you can measure. You need to have a project. And they might say, well, I'm going to buy computers. We're going to be more productive. And then we're going to combat mental health or some other thing. But it just, when you really boil it down and when you get to the budget and you look at different things, it just still seems like it's about buying something. And no foundation, no community organization is going to just buy computers for people or a group of people, video equipment, things like that. That's just not, they might do it if it's a part of a really, really good project that warrants that kind of thing. But to try to backward engineer it the other way around, I've just never seen that really turn out to be viable. The one exception I will give you is that I did have a student one semester who wanted to basically, he sort of started off, I think, about buying and replacing and repairing wheelchairs for the wheelchair basketball team on campus. And that he had a pretty good outreach program to raise awareness, to increase activity for individuals with physical disabilities. It ended up just being a very, I think, reasonable, viable proposal. The money wasn't too outrageous, and it was there was an infrastructure in place to support it. He had a good needs statement. That was a really good proposal and a viable idea. That's the only exception I can think of. For the most part, if it's just kind of seems like it's just purchasing something, that's not a good idea. The point would be, again, to find a project that over the course of a year you could do. And I do think I will share with you a worksheet that's intended to help you flesh out ideas for your project. You don't need to complete that whole worksheet necessarily, but I do think looking at it and kind of seeing the different issues that they're asking you about on there, like what are your partner institutions, your your nonprofit that you're partnering with, who are the intended recipients of the project, who would it benefit, those kind of things are all really good to think through. So I would highly recommend just looking through that worksheet. And even if you don't answer in detail all of the slots on the worksheet, I still think it's really, really helpful to look through, and the reading for the book really helps. I also highly recommend doing research early on for the project idea. You can look at, if you think you have a good sponsor in mind, you can look at what they've funded in the past, the kind of projects that can be a good thing to generate ideas. Look at organizations you've worked with or organizations you think are very positive in the community. You could talk to people, talk about, gaps or maybe, projects in that $5,000 to $30,000 range that you think would be, would be really good. You can think about research. If a project's too big, what I've seen, I've even helped recently a group of exercise and physiology professors, talk to them about a project at a middle school. Their ultimate game, they got a grant funded for about $30,000. Their ultimate aim is to do a Department of Agriculture grant, a big federal grant, but they are now collecting research to help move along in that phase toward a bigger grant. So that also too could be a viable avenue for some of you to, if you have that big idea, but you don't really know how to get there yet, do the research or maybe do a preliminary project that's smaller and more scaled down that would help you get to it. Another thing that's really, really important, I think, is each week to think through like what you're proposing, to think through your project and to try to like look into it, to do some research, to try to figure out what the components are. And I'll give you a good example. This last semester I had a student who wanted to do a kind of an outdoor community space for Muncie, in downtown Muncie. And he drove down there and actually drove around to look at downtown Muncie. And what he realized is there's already a space like the one he was thinking of in downtown Muncie. And so he changed his idea. He ended up doing a idea for a community garden at Ball State that would support Cardinal Kitchen, which is a nonprofit on campus that supports food insecure college students, and they do a really wonderful job. And this was for fresh produce for that nonprofit. I think it was a tremendous idea. It was a really, really good idea, and it was really, I think, viable for funding at the end. But he put his time in. He thought through each section. He kind of worked through it, got feedback, and it ended up being a really good proposal. So, and just finding, I think, where there are holes in existing programs. Another example of this is there's a great organization on campus in Muncie called Motivate Our Minds that provides after-school activities for children in the Whiteley community. Two teachers started it a long time ago, but I had a student in class who worked there and realized there wasn't a lot of mentorship for older students transitioning into high school and to think about college, and specifically for African American males. And she worked on that project. It was a wonderful proposal. I think, again, really viable, and for a really good organization that has a really good track record in the community. Definitely think of, partnering with, for most all projects, partnering with a 501(c) or a nonprofit is an important component. And they can often give you, if you know the director, communicate with them, they can often give you good feedback or advice on project ideas. So that's another thing to kind of think about. So, all right. And I would recommend that you not, for this, there are sometimes grants for seed money for organizations, but I would recommend not using this class to try to start a nonprofit. That too, I've just never seen flesh out well. I mean, most nonprofits, start off kind of with some organizational structure. They have a board of directors, those kinds of things that develop over time. If you don't have all that stuff in place, it's just too hard to flesh that all out in one semester. There's just too many unknowns. And so I think having, again, a more specific project idea would be really helpful. So hope this video is helpful.